Alright, what's up guys? So today I'm going to be documenting the head removal process of a 4G63 engine. The process is going to be pretty much exactly the same from a 90 to a 99 DSM, so Eclipse or Talon. It'll also be very similar for Talon VR4. The Evo 8 and 9 process for removing a head is also very similar, except bolt sizes will be different, and I'll note those in the video. So the car we're looking at right here is a 91 needle Talon 4G63 6-bolt. And like I said, the process is going to be very similar for anything with the 4G63 engine in it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is remove spark plug wires. This might be a little bit different depending on what ignition coil setup you have. I've already gone ahead and removed my spark plug wires. And I'm also going to remove the ignition coil up here. I will make getting to stuff a little bit easier. Spark plug wire removal is pretty much straightforward. So I've gone ahead and taken out spark plug wires and also removed the ignition coil. So next we're going to start working on the wiring harness. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what you need to remove from the wiring harness. So mine's already pulled apart a little bit, but what you're going to need to remove is all 4 injector clips, and then the wiring harness follows down the passenger side of the engine, and there'll be a plug for your TPS, plug for your crank position sensor, and then all these plugs down here on the coolant elbow or the thermostat housing. Depending on what year your car is, you will also have 1 or 2 oxygen sensor plugs, and then there's also the idle stepper control motor plug at the back of the throttle body. There are also various little plugs, but they should be pretty obvious. So next, go ahead and remove the entire wiring harness that connects to the motor itself. So now we're going to remove the upper intercooler pipe. This one isn't stock, but it's just held in by some hose clamps. The stock one isn't that much different. So now I've unbolted my upper intercooler pipe, so now I'm going to remove the entirety of it. And there is my whole upper intercooler pipe. So next we're going to start focusing on the fuel rail. The fuel rail has 2 connections, a feed, and over here a return. Once again, depending on what kind of fuel rail you have, this may differ a little bit, but it should be pretty similar. To make it easier, I'm going to leave the return line attached and just disconnect the fuel feed. The fuel feed is held on by 2 10mm bolts. Those bolts like to strip really easily, so take caution. And the fuel line will be full of fuel, so you're going to want to put something under it to catch the fuel. I have found the best thing to do is to take your fuel feed, make sure it's sort of empty of fuel, and then zip tie it up here if you have a strut bar, or zip tie it against the firewall. So next we're going to remove the fuel rail. The fuel rail is held on by 3 12mm bolts. Between the bolts and the head there are spacers. Make sure to keep track of these because they will fall into the depths of your engine bay. For now, just tuck the fuel rail up onto your range tray. So now I'm going to start focusing on removing vacuum lines. Once again, this car isn't stock, so the vacuum lines may be different on your car, but for the most part, you're just going to remove any vacuum lines attached to the intake manifold. On the back, there'll be a brake booster line, which is the big one. While you're back there, also remove the throttle cable from the throttle body. So next, in preparation for head removal, we're going to go ahead and take off the valve cover. Stock, these bolts are 10mm. Mine have been replaced with Allen. With the stock bolts, it is important to keep track which one goes where because the bolts are different lengths. If your car also has a stock cam gear cover, go ahead and remove that. That's also held in with 10mm bolts. So if your car is stock, you're going to have a PCV line right here, and you also have a PCV valve right here. Now, if your valve cover has been on there for any extended period of time, it's going to be hard to remove. These valve covers are very fragile and prone to crack, so you're going to want to use a rubber mallet. And as you can see, mine's already free. Now, once it is free, you can remove it, but for the meantime, we're just going to set it back here so we don't get anything down inside the valve cover area. Okay, so the next step you're going to want to do is focus on the exhaust manifold. The easiest way to do it is taking off the 4 bolts that bolt the manifold to the turbo. These are 14mm. These are going to be rusted on there, and you're going to need something like a 1/2-inch breaker. So now we have the 4 bolts removed that go to the turbo, so we can focus on removing the nuts off the studs from the head. These 4 up top are 12mm, then 3 12mm on the bottom, and then the ends have 14mm. You're going to need some sort of swivel extension to get to those, and you also may need to remove your turbo J pipe depending on what sort of intercooler setup you have. So now I've gone ahead and broke loose all of those nuts off the studs, so now we can go ahead and take them all off. If you have a EGT bung like I do, go ahead and remove that, and you should be able to remove the rest of the nuts and pull off the exhaust manifold. So pretty much the hardest bolt on the exhaust manifold is this one right underneath the, or actually right behind the power steering pump. So the easiest way I've found to do it is to take about a 6-inch extension like this with a short wobble on it or a swivel, and the extension is actually a wobble too. So that way you can sneak it in right behind the power steering pump there, and it should give you just enough room to get on the nut and pull it off. So more than likely, these copper nuts that come off your exhaust manifold are going to be nice and rounded off. So plan on replacing these. So with everything removed from the exhaust manifold, you can go ahead and just pull it off. Make sure to grab the gaskets. So now we're going to talk about removing the intake manifold. It's definitely not necessary to remove it to take off the head. However, it's going to be much heavier with the intake manifold still attached. If you still have air conditioning in your car, it'll be pretty much impossible to get to those lower intake manifold bolts, so I'd recommend leaving it on. There's 3 12mm bolts on top, along with 2 14mm nuts. There's 1 14mm bolt on the bottom of the intake manifold, along with 4 more 12mm bolts. Word of advice, go ahead and remove the battery or disconnect the battery before trying to remove the lower intake manifold bolts. The starter positive is right there, and it's very easy to short out. Okay, so I've gone ahead and removed all the bolts off the intake manifold, so now it's completely free. Minus a couple of things back here. I've got a grounding strap, and it looks like the throttle cable bracket is still attached, so go ahead and remove those. So with everything detached now, we should be able to just lift the intake manifold off. So the next thing we're going to want to do is remove the upper radiator hose. Now it's really only necessary to remove whatever coolant comes out of here, not drain the entire cooling system. But if you'd like to, while you're at it, replace the entire coolant system, then go ahead and drain everything. I'm just gonna disconnect the upper radiator hose, and whatever drains out is all I'm going to worry about. Go ahead and protect anything you don't want coolant getting on. And then go ahead and tuck the upper radiator hose so it's out of the way. So now let's talk about timing and timing marks. You're going to want to put your motor at top dead center. This happens when the two dowel pins on the cam gears are facing 12 o'clock and these inner marks are facing each other exactly. Now, you're going to want to do this so when you put it back together, you can make sure your motor is still in time, and it will save you a huge headache. The proper way to do this would be to use the Mitsubishi special tool that compresses the timing belt tensioner. However, I plan on doing a timing belt, so I am not going to bother with this, but I still will show you how to keep these cam gears attached to the timing belt and prevent the timing belt from slipping. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure it is at top dead center exactly. Now with the 17mm bolt, we're going to slowly turn this cam gear so that these line up perfectly. And there you go, that's all it took for mine. Now they are perfectly lined up, and I'll show you the next step. Then, to keep the timing belt attached to the cam gears, I like to use zip ties. I would do at least 2 zip ties per cam gear. I've got my timing belt now zip tied to my cam gears, so we can go ahead and continue with the next step. So in order to remove the head, you're gonna have to remove this stud on the far right side of the head. My preferred method of choice to do this is to steal this 14mm nut that came off with this stud right here, and then do the double nut technique on this stud. You gotta pull out this stud so you can clear this bracket right here. So basically all you do is take the 2 nuts and you tighten them down to each other, and then once they're tight enough, you can just come in here with a regular open-ended wrench and grab the back one, and then you can slowly just pull out the stud. And then there's the stud. So it seems like from what I've seen that most people are confident with everything up until this point, and then once you get under the valve cover and get into some of the internal stuff, people seem to shy away from that kind of work. But really once you get familiarized with what's under there, it's really not too scary. So some things you do want to remember though, cams are very fragile. You may not think that a large piece of iron or steel would be fragile, but these things will break very easily. So it's very important to figure out the correct torque for these bolts, and also the torque pattern that Mitsubishi outlines in the technical service manual. You don't need a service manual to do this job because the info is available and the info will be in this video. So basically the first thing you're going to want to do is we're going to want to take the cam gears off of the cams, and you're going to want to make sure that this cam does not spin while you're doing it, because that could potentially cause your valves to impact the pistons and cause bent valves or a broken valve. So now we're going to be removing the cam gears off of the camshafts, and to do that we're going to want to hold the cam in place so you don't potentially impact the piston with the valves and cause any valve damage. So we're going to hold the cam in place with a large adjustable wrench like this, and the cam gear bolt itself is a 17mm. Now stock, these are torqued down anywhere from 60 to 80 foot-pounds. A cheater bar, or a pipe in this case, and a large 1/2 inch breaker bar are going to be necessary to break loose the bolt. And when you're doing this, you're going to want to make sure that the hand on the camshaft isn't the one that's moving. This one should be stationary, and this one should do the moving. And then basically, break them loose. Now mine have been removed before, but yours will more than likely make a loud snapping noise when you take them off. So then once again, we'll do it to this cam gear. Make sure this arm isn't moving. You want to make sure this one is doing the moving. And then once again, break it loose. So now the cam gear bolts are broken loose from the camshaft and we can continue. So now we can go ahead and remove the bolts from the camshaft. So now we can go ahead and just pop off the cam gears. Just wiggle them. And the cams are going to spin a little bit, but that's completely normal. And just sort of move them out of the way for now. So next I'm going to remove the camshafts. This is completely optional, but I do it for peace of mind. If you do decide to remove your cams, it is very important that you do the correct detorque procedure. And that starts with this cam cap as number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the last one needs to be the timing belt side cam cap. Now you do this to even the load on the cam, otherwise it's actually very easy to break a cam. And at first I'm just going to start breaking these loose and not pulling the bolts out all the way yet. And now I'm just going to start slowly backing out all of the cam cap bolts. Each of the cam caps is marked with either an I or an E for intake and exhaust, and they are also numbered, so you can easily keep track of them. And once they're broken loose, the sequence does not matter that much. So these cam caps aren't going to pop off super easy. So what I like to do is to take a plastic handled screwdriver, something that's non-marring, non-destructive to the cam caps, and go ahead and give them a good tap. And then you should be able to remove the cam cap. So from the factory, this cam cap right here is held on with RTV onto the head. So the easiest thing to do is to get on this lip right here and very gently pry up on the cam cap. Okay, so if the cam seal has been on there for any extended period of time, it's gonna stick on there. So go ahead and work the cam cap back and forth, or go ahead and work the cam seal back and forth a little bit. And then you should just be able to pull the cam straight up and out. And I would recommend wrapping this in saran wrap or putting it in a plastic bag. And now we're just gonna repeat that same procedure with this cam, but first, we're gonna put the cam caps back in the exact same order. So now the head is pretty much ready to remove, minus a couple things. We've still got a couple hoses attached to the thermostat housing here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those. They're going to be filled with coolant, so get ready to catch that. So now we're going to start pulling out the head studs on the motor in this case. These motors stock have head bolts in them, but I have ARP head studs, which are 14mm nut. I believe stock are either 14 or 12mm. These are torqued down to 100 foot-pounds, so they're going to be kind of hard to remove. I'm going to need a pretty big 1/2-inch breaker in order to remove them. When removing the head studs or head bolts, it is very important that you do it in the same procedure that you would torque down the head studs. I'll go ahead and provide that torque pattern in the video. You want to make sure you follow this pattern just to prevent any damage or warpage to the head. So now my head studs are broke loose. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to a 1/2" ratchet and then just go ahead and loosen them up. Once they are broken loose, the sequence does not matter. And just in order to keep from losing these, I'm gonna go ahead and pull out the rockers. Now it's important you keep track of what order these came out of. So I like to place them in the box in the same order I took them out. So I've go ahead and removed all the rockers. You can remove the lifters if you want from their holes, but that is not critical as they won't fall out easily. One thing I've noticed with ARP head studs, if you do have them in your car, is sometimes the entire stud will come out instead of just the nut. This is completely fine, just make sure you keep track of it. So now the head is basically ready to remove. One thing I did forget to remove was this motor mount over here, which is held in by two 14mm nuts, two 14mm bolts, and one 19mm bolt that holds the motor mount to the chassis. I need to remove this in order to get to a bolt that holds the lower timing cover to the head. In order to remove this, you're going to need to support the engine by the bottom with a jack on the oil pan, and then go ahead and take out these bolts. Take out this last bolt that holds the lower timing cover to the head, and the head should be completely free. So removing the head can be kind of a pain, depending on how long it's been on there, and if you have head studs or not. Enlisting the help of a friend would be helpful. When lifting off the head, it is important to pull straight up, and rocking action can help you break loose off the head studs if you have them. If you just have head bolts, the head should just lift right off, no problem. And there you go, head is removed. So there you go, the head is removed from the engine. I think start to finish, this took me about 2.5 to 3 hours. However, I've done this a couple times. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it was a little bit helpful, and I'll see you next time.